There's a silence spreading across coffee shops, bars, and crowded streets. Not the silence of peace. The silence of withdrawal. Millions of men have stopped approaching women entirely. Not because they don't want connection. Not because they lack desire. But because something fundamental in the social contract broke. And nobody wants to talk about why. We live in the most connected era in human history. Billions of people, one swipe away. Yet loneliness has become an epidemic. Touch starvation is a medical term now. And the distance between men and women has never felt wider. Here's what's strange, the desire didn't disappear. The courage did. For generations, approaching someone you found attractive was terrifying, but normal. Your hands would sweat. Your heart would race. You'd stumble over words. But you'd do it anyway, because the script was clear. This is how connection begins. Now, that script has been shredded. Let's talk about what changed, not in dating advice columns, but in the brain. The human nervous system runs a constant calculation, risk versus reward. When you approach someone, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, scans for threats. In the past, the threats were manageable. She might say no. I might feel embarrassed for a moment. I'll survive. But now, the equation has shifted. Now, the threats include public humiliation, being filmed, going viral, being labeled, losing your job, losing your reputation. And here's the brutal truth about neuroscience. The brain weighs potential losses 3 times heavier than potential gains. So when a man runs that calculation today, connection on one side, social annihilation on the other, his nervous system screams, don't move. There wasn't a single moment. But there was a tipping point. Somewhere between 2014 and 2018, enough viral videos, enough public shamings, enough headlines accumulated in the collective male consciousness that a message crystallized, approaching women is dangerous now. Not physically dangerous. Socially dangerous. Psychologically dangerous. And once enough men absorbed that message, they started asking a question that previous generations rarely entertained: is it even worth it? That question, that hesitation, reveals something profound. Not about weakness. Not about cowardice. But about a species that evolved to avoid existential threats, now perceiving romantic pursuit as one. Here's what we need to understand before we go deeper. This isn't about blame. This isn't about men versus women. This is about a cultural transformation that happened faster than our psychology could adapt. Social norms that took millennia to form fractured in less than a decade. And both men and women are now navigating the wreckage, confused, lonely, and increasingly convinced the other side doesn't care. But they do care. They're just terrified. When the cost of trying exceeds the hope of succeeding, the brain chooses paralysis over risk. So what are these brutal reasons? What transformed approach from normal to nightmare? In the next chapter, we're going into the fear economy, the mechanisms that turned private rejection into public execution. We're talking about smartphones, social media, and how one bad moment can now define a man's entire existence. Because once you understand the fear, you understand the silence. And maybe, just maybe, we can start rebuilding the bridge. Picture this: a man walks up to a woman in a bookstore. He's nervous but genuine. He mentions the book she's holding. She's not interested. She says no. He apologizes, walks away. In 1995, that story ends there. In 2025, that story might end with him trending on Twitter by dinner. Reason 1. Public shaming. Every phone is a camera. Every camera is a potential courtroom. And every courtroom has a jury of millions waiting to convict. What used to be a private moment, awkward, yes, but contained, can now become a spectacle. A TikTok video titled "Creep Tried to Hit on Me at Target" with 4 million views. A Reddit thread dissecting every word he said. A screenshot on Instagram with laughing emojis. The man in that moment. He has no defense. No context. No humanity. Just a villain in someone else's content. And here's the thing, it doesn't even have to happen to you. You just have to see it happen to someone else. Once. Twice. A dozen times. Your brain does the math. It learns. That could be me. Psychologists call this observational learning. You don't need to touch fire to know it burns. You just need to watch someone else get scorched. And men have watched. Over and over. They've seen good intentions turned into memes. They've seen nervous approaches turned into evidence of moral failure. And they've learned the lesson: stay invisible. Reason 2, the amplification effect. Here's where it gets darker. In the past, if you approached someone and it went badly, maybe a few people saw. Maybe her friends heard about it. Maybe you felt embarrassed for a week. But it faded. Social mistakes used to dissolve into the past. Now, they crystallize into permanence. One woman posts. 10 friends share. 100 strangers comment. 1,000 people form an opinion about a man they've never met based on a 15-second clip with no context. And that man, he might never even know it happened. But the effect ripples through the entire male population watching. Because every viral shaming isn't just about that one guy. It's a warning. A threat. A reminder of what could happen if you dare to be vulnerable in public. Let's talk neuroscience again. Loss aversion. The principle that losses hurt roughly 3 times more than equivalent gains feel good. But it's worse than that when we're talking about social loss. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Your brain literally processes humiliation like an injury. Now multiply that pain by 1 million witnesses. The nervous system doesn't just register it as pain. It registers it as danger. And when something is dangerous, you avoid it. Not consciously. Instinctively. Imagine being a young man today. You scroll through social media. You see men being mocked for trying. You see approaches labeled as harassment even when they were polite. You see the comment sections filled with anger and contempt. What does your nervous system learn? Approach equals threat. Silence equals safety. It's not a choice at that point. It's conditioning. Classical conditioning, like Pavlov's dogs, except instead of salivating at a bell, you're freezing at the thought of eye contact. Here's the tragedy in all of this: nobody wins. The women who genuinely want to be approached, and they exist, more than social media would have you believe, they're now living in a world where fewer men have the courage to try. The men who would have been respectful, kind, emotionally intelligent, the good ones, they're the first to withdraw because they're the most sensitive to social consequences. And the men who don't care, the ones who ignore boundaries, they're still approaching. Because they don't care about being shamed. They never did. So the fear economy doesn't filter out bad behavior. It filters out conscientiousness. It removes the men who were most likely to do it right. There's an empathy gap here we need to name. When a man approaches, he's not just risking rejection. He's risking his identity, his sense of self, his place in the social order. And society has very little sympathy for that vulnerability. We mock it. We meme it. We tell men to man up while simultaneously punishing them for trying. The emotional cost of approach, the real, neurological, psychological cost, has become invisible. And when pain is invisible, it gets inflicted without guilt. In a world where trying can destroy you, not trying becomes the only logical defense. So men stopped trying. Not because they stopped wanting connection, but because the math changed. And when you're running on a nervous system designed to keep you alive, you don't fight math. You obey it. But here's what nobody's talking about: the fear economy isn't the only reason. It's just the beginning. Because even if you're brave enough to risk the humiliation, there's another problem waiting. A problem of abundance. Of infinite choice that somehow creates zero satisfaction. And that's where we're going next. Into the paradox that promised connection but delivered loneliness. Into the screen that replaced the street. Into the swipe that killed the spark. Let's talk about a man named Alex. Not a real person, a composite. But real enough. Alex is 28. He's on 4 dating apps. He spends an hour a day swiping. He's had matches, conversations, even a few dates. But here's the strange part: when he sees a woman he finds attractive in real life, at a coffee shop, at a gym, in line at the grocery store, he does nothing. He looks away. He scrolls his phone. He leaves. And if you asked him why, he'd struggle to explain it. Because the reason isn't logical. It's psychological. It's the paradox of choice, and it's killing his ability to connect. Reason 3. Digital displacement. Dating apps were supposed to make things easier, more efficient, more democratic. Swipe right, match, message, meet. Simple. Except something happened along the way. The apps didn't just supplement real-world connection. They replaced it. And in that replacement, something essential was lost. When you approach someone in person, you're present. Vulnerable. Reading body language. Feeling energy. Taking a genuine risk. When you swipe on an app, you're shopping. Browsing. Judging a person by 6 photos and a bio written to impress strangers. The apps promised intimacy but delivered commodification. People became products. Connection became a transaction. And the skills required for real-world approach, courage, presence, reading subtle social cues, they atrophied. Here's what Alex doesn't realize. Every hour he spends swiping is an hour his brain is learning that connection happens through screens. That rejection is just a left swipe, painless, anonymous, consequence-free. So when he encounters a real woman in a real space, his nervous system has no script. No muscle memory. Just anxiety. Because real life requires something apps don't, immediate vulnerability. No time to craft the perfect message. No option to unmatch if it gets awkward. Just you, her, and the terrifying reality of being seen. And for a generation raised on digital mediation, being seen feels like being exposed. Reason 4. The paradox itself. Here's the cruel irony. Dating apps give men access to more potential partners than any generation in history. Hundreds of profiles. Thousands, if you're in a city. And that abundance should feel like freedom, right? Like opportunity. But psychologists discovered something dark about unlimited choice. It doesn't make us happier. It makes us paralyzed. When you have 3 options, you can evaluate them and choose. When you have 300, you can't. Your brain freezes. Every choice feels like a loss of all the others. Every person you message could be less attractive, less interesting, less perfect than the next profile. So you keep swiping. Searching for the optimal match that doesn't exist. And in that search, you miss the good enough matches that could have become great. This is called the paradox of choice, and it destroys satisfaction. But it does something worse in the context of dating. It creates a permanent grass is greener mentality. If you match with someone, you know there are 100 more behind her. If you go on a date, you're wondering if someone better is still in your queue. The apps don't just give you options. They train you to never commit. To never stop searching. To never believe that what's in front of you is enough. And here's the truly insidious part. That mentality doesn't stay on the app. It bleeds into real life. So when Alex sees that woman at the coffee shop, even if she's beautiful, interesting, right there, his brain whispers, but what if there's someone better on Hinge? And he walks away. Let's go deeper into the psychology. Hedonic adaptation. The process by which pleasure fades the more you experience it. The first time you swipe and match, there's a dopamine hit. Your brain lights up. It feels like victory. But by the 100th match, it means nothing. The swipe becomes mechanical. The match becomes empty. You're chasing a high that your nervous system has already adjusted to. And here's the dark side. While the pleasure fades, the habit remains. You keep swiping not because it feels good, but because stopping feels worse. You're not looking for connection anymore. You're looking for stimulation. And real-world approach can't compete with that. Because real approach is slow. Uncertain. It requires patience and presence. And a brain hooked on the slot machine dopamine of swipe culture doesn't have patience anymore. There's another asymmetry we need to talk about. The vulnerability gap. On an app, everyone hides behind their best photos, their wittiest lines, their most curated selves. Rejection happens in private. You unmatch. You ghost. You move on. No confrontation. No awkwardness. No courage required. But in person, the man has to walk up, interrupt her day, risk her discomfort, risk his embarrassment. And after years of app-based interaction, that risk feels disproportionate. Why would you gamble on real-world rejection when you can avoid it entirely by staying on your phone? The apps didn't just make connection easier. They made avoidance effortless. And humans, wired to conserve energy and avoid pain, will always take the path of least resistance. Let me paint you a picture. Alex sits on his couch on a Friday night. He's swiping, matching, messaging 3 different women. He feels productive, like he's putting himself out there. But here's the reality, he's not out there. He's hiding there, behind a screen, behind carefully chosen words, behind the illusion of effort. And when Sunday comes and he hasn't met anyone, hasn't felt anything, hasn't connected with anyone, he blames the apps. He blames the women. He blames the algorithm. But he doesn't blame the real problem. He's forgotten how to be vulnerable. He's lost the ability to walk up to someone and risk being human. When you can swipe 1,000 faces but can't hold eye contact with one, you haven't gained access to more people. You've lost access to yourself. And that's the tragedy. The apps promised abundance but delivered emptiness. They promised efficiency but created paralysis. And men like Alex are caught in the middle, too afraid to approach in person, too numb to feel anything online. But the paradox of choice is only part of the story. Because even if you're brave enough to approach, even if you delete the apps and step into the real world, there's still a minefield waiting. A minefield with no map. Where the same action can be charming or creepy depending on variables you can't control. And that's where we're going next. Into the confusion. Into the contradiction. Into the new rules that nobody wrote down but everyone's expected to follow. There's a man standing 10 feet away from a woman at a bar. He's been standing there for 5 minutes. Not moving. Not drinking. Just standing. His friend finally asks him what he's doing. And he says, "I'm trying to figure out if it's okay." His friend laughs. "If what's okay?" And the man says, "To say hi." He's not joking. He's not being dramatic. He's genuinely paralyzed. Because somewhere in his mind, he's running through 1,000 scenarios. Is this the right setting? Is she giving signs? Will she think I'm bothering her? Will her friends think I'm a creep? Is there a right way to do this anymore? And before he finds an answer, she leaves. And he goes home. Alone. Again. Reason 5. Mixed signals. Society tells men to be confident, to take initiative, to approach, to lead. But it also tells them, don't be aggressive. Don't be pushy. Don't assume interest. Don't make her uncomfortable. And here's the problem. Those 2 messages are contradictory. Confidence requires certainty. But the second message injects pure doubt. So men are stuck in a psychological trap. Be bold, but not too bold. Be interested, but not too interested. Read the signals, but don't assume the signals mean what you think they mean. It's like being told to walk across a tightrope while someone shakes the rope and shouts conflicting instructions. Eventually, you just stop walking. The script used to be clearer. Not perfect. Not without problems. But clearer. A man approached. A woman responded. If she smiled, engaged, stayed, green light. If she turned away, gave short answers, excused herself, red light. Simple. Not anymore. Now a smile might just be politeness. Engagement might be her being nice because she's afraid of confrontation. Staying might mean she's waiting for her friend. Every signal has a footnote. Every cue has a counterinterpretation. And men, who are already anxious about approach, now have to be mind readers too. And when you can't read the signals, your brain defaults to the safest interpretation. Do nothing. Reason 6. Contextual confusion. Here's where it gets truly maddening. The same approach in different contexts gets wildly different reactions. A man approaches a woman at a social mixer specifically designed for meeting people. That's appropriate. A man approaches a woman at a bar where people go to socialize. That's acceptable. A man approaches a woman at a bookstore. Gray area. A man approaches a woman at the gym. Risky. A man approaches a woman on public transit. Potentially threatening. A man approaches a woman with headphones in. Don't even think about it. But here's the catch. The man is doing the same thing in all these scenarios. Expressing interest. a tempting connection. Yet the social judgment swings from romantic to creepy based on invisible, unwritten, constantly shifting rules. And it's not just location. It's timing, body language, her mood that day, whether she finds him attractive, whether her friends are watching, whether someone nearby is filming, whether the cultural conversation that week is about harassment or loneliness. A man has to calculate all of this in real time before saying hello. And if he miscalculates, if he reads the context wrong, the consequences aren't just rejection. They're moral condemnation. Because a mistaken approach isn't seen as a social error anymore. It's seen as a character flaw. And once that label sticks, it doesn't come off. Let's talk about the interpretation problem. Intent versus perception. In the old framework, intent mattered. If a man approached respectfully, even if she wasn't interested, he wasn't a villain. He was just someone who tried. But the new framework has flipped that. Intent is irrelevant. Only perception matters. If she feels uncomfortable, he's done something wrong. Even if he meant no harm. Even if he followed every rule he thought existed. And here's the psychological weight of that shift. It means a man is never in control of his own morality. He can do everything right and still be wrong if her internal experience says so. That's not empowerment. That's helplessness. And the brain hates helplessness. When you can't control the outcome of your actions, you stop acting. There's a concept in psychology called learned helplessness. When an organism is repeatedly subjected to an aversive stimulus it can't control, it eventually stops trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. Men are experiencing a version of this in dating. They try. They fail. They adjust. They try again. They fail differently. They study the rules. The rules change. They follow advice. The advice contradicts itself. And eventually, the lesson the nervous system learns is, there's no winning move. So stop playing. Not because they're lazy. Not because they don't care. But because their brain has categorized approach as an unsolvable problem. And unsolvable problems trigger shutdown, not motivation. Let me tell you about Marcus. Composite again, but painfully real. Marcus saw a woman at a coffee shop. She was reading. He loved the book. He thought, this is perfect. Common ground. Low pressure. He walked over. Smiled. Said, great book. One of my favorites. She looked up. Annoyed. Said, I'm trying to read. He apologized immediately. Walked away. Felt like an idiot. But here's what haunted him. 3 weeks later, he overheard 2 women at the same coffee shop talking about how no men approach anymore. How dating is dead. How guys don't take initiative. And Marcus wanted to scream. I tried. I got shut down. What do you want from me? But he didn't scream. He just went home. And he never approached anyone in public again. That's the whiplash. The cultural mixed message that's driving men insane. Why don't men approach anymore? And how dare you approach me? Exist in the same space. And men are stuck between them. Blamed for inaction. Punished for action. And the worst part. Both criticisms are sincere. Some women genuinely want to be approached. Some genuinely don't. And there's no way to know which is which until you try. But trying has become so high risk that most men have decided the only rational choice is opting out. Here's the stoic truth in all this. You can only control your actions, not how they're received. But that philosophy assumes you have a baseline of what right action is. And modern dating has erased that baseline. There's no longer a consensus on what respectful approach looks like. One woman's charming is another woman's creepy. One context's romantic is another context's harassment. And without a shared understanding, men are navigating by guesswork. And guesswork, when the stakes are your reputation and livelihood, feels less like dating and more like defusing a bomb. When the rules change faster than you can learn them, the safest move is not to move at all. So men freeze. Not because they're cowards, but because their nervous system has done the math and concluded that approach, in the current environment, is a gamble with asymmetric risk. You risk everything. You gain, maybe a conversation. Maybe. And when the brain runs that equation, it chooses paralysis. But even that doesn't capture the full picture. Because beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, there's something deeper happening. Something about meaning. About purpose. About economic reality and existential crisis. And that's where we're going now. Into the invisible wall. The reasons men won't approach that have nothing to do with women at all. But everything to do with how they see themselves. There's a different kind of silence we haven't talked about yet. It's not the silence of fear. It's the silence of exhaustion. Of men who aren't avoiding women because they're afraid of rejection. They're avoiding women because they're afraid of themselves. Afraid they have nothing to offer. Afraid they're not enough. Afraid that even if she said yes, they'd just be dragging her into the collapse they're already living. This isn't about approach anxiety anymore. This is about existential crisis. And it's the most brutal reason of all. Reason 7, economic pressure. Let's be blunt. Dating costs money. Not just the dates themselves, the dinners, the drinks, the tickets. But the prerequisites. The gym membership to look attractive. The decent clothes. The car. The apartment that isn't a disaster. The career that's stable enough to project confidence. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud, a growing number of men don't have those things. They're underemployed. Drowning in debt. Living with roommates at 30. Working gig jobs with no benefits. And they know, whether it's fair or not, that they're being judged on those things. That economic stability is part of the attraction equation. So they withdraw. Not because they're gold diggers in reverse. But because they've internalized the message that a man who can't provide isn't worth pursuing. This isn't about old gender roles. Or it is, but not in the way people think. It's about the psychological weight of feeling like a failure. About scrolling through social media and seeing other men with careers, houses, trips to Europe. And looking at your own life, the unpaid bills, the dead-end job, the student loans that will outlive you, and thinking, what do I have to offer? And when that question has no good answer, approaching a woman doesn't feel like opportunity. It feels like exposure. Like inviting someone to witness your inadequacy up close. So men hide. Not from women. From their own shame. The data backs this up. Studies show that male labor force participation has been declining for decades. Men in their prime working years are increasingly disconnected from employment. And as economic prospects dim, so does dating activity. It's not coincidence. It's cause and effect. When a man doesn't see a future for himself, he doesn't see a future with anyone else either. And approaching someone requires belief in that future. Belief that you have something to build together. Without that belief, approach feels like a lie. Like pretending to be someone you're not. And most men, despite what the internet says, aren't good at lying. Especially to themselves. Reason 8, the collapse of third spaces. Think back 20 years. Where did people meet? Not just at bars and clubs. At community centers. Churches. Book clubs. Volunteer organizations. Sports leagues. Dance classes. Coffee shops where regulars actually talked. These were third spaces, places that weren't home or work, where people gathered without agenda, where interaction was natural and low pressure. You'd see the same faces week after week. Conversations would build gradually. Trust would form. And somewhere in that slow rhythm, connection happened. Not because anyone was approaching. But because proximity and repeated exposure created opportunities for organic attraction. Those spaces are dying. Or dead. The church attendance has plummeted. Community organizations are struggling. Local coffee shops are being replaced by Starbucks where everyone wears headphones. Volunteer groups can't get young people to show up. Sports leagues are underfunded. The places where men and women used to naturally exist in the same space, doing the same activities, building rapport without the pressure of making a move, they're disappearing. And what's replacing them? Nothing. Screens. Isolation. The illusion of community through social media that actually prevents real community from forming. So even if a man wanted to meet someone naturally, where would he go? The infrastructure for organic connection has been dismantled. And nobody's building it back. Here's what this means on a practical level. The only places left to approach are high-pressure environments. Bars, clubs, dating apps. Places where the context is explicitly sexual or romantic. Where approach is expected but also judged. Where there's no time to build rapport, no history to soften the awkwardness, no mutual activity to serve as a bridge. It's all or nothing. Cold approach or nothing. And cold approach is the hardest, most anxiety-inducing form of social interaction humans engage in. We've eliminated the easy paths and left only the cliff face. And then we wonder why fewer people are climbing. Let's talk about meaning. Because beneath the economic pressure and the disappearing third spaces, there's a deeper crisis happening. A crisis of purpose. For most of human history, men derived meaning from clear roles. Provider, protector, builder. Whether you agree with those roles or not, they provided psychological structure. A sense of direction. But those roles have been deconstructed, rightfully in many ways, without being replaced with anything coherent. Modern men are told, don't define yourself by work. Don't define yourself by provision. Don't define yourself by physical strength. Don't base your worth on external achievement. Okay. Fine. But then, what? What is the source of masculine meaning in 2025? Nobody has an answer. And when you don't know what you're for, pursuing a relationship feels premature. Like trying to invite someone into a house that hasn't been built yet. This is the meaning crisis, and it's causing withdrawal at a scale we've never seen. Men aren't just avoiding approach. They're avoiding life. Record numbers are living with parents into their 30s. Not pursuing careers. Not building social networks. Spending hours a day on video games, porn, social media, digital anesthesia for existential pain. And you can judge that. Call it weakness. Call it failure to launch. But judgment doesn't change the reality. When people don't see a path forward, they stop walking. And when men don't see a version of masculinity that feels coherent, valuable, and achievable, they stop trying to embody one. And dating, which requires confidence and self-worth, becomes impossible. Here's the cost nobody's calculating. What happens to a society when half the population withdraws from connection? When men stop approaching, women wait. And wait. And eventually stop expecting. Loneliness becomes normalized. Birth rates plummet. Families don't form. Communities fracture further. And both sides retreat into resentment and isolation, each blaming the other for a problem that's bigger than both of them. This isn't a gender war. It's a collective crisis. And the longer we deny that, the worse it gets. But here's what gives me hope, strange as that sounds at the end of a dark chapter. The fact that we're talking about this. The fact that enough people feel the weight of this silence that they're asking why. Because awareness is the first step. Not toward going back. The past wasn't paradise. But toward going forward. Toward building new norms consciously instead of letting them collapse accidentally. Toward creating spaces where connection can happen without terror. Toward empathy. Toward shared responsibility for the bridge that's broken. The opposite of approach isn't rejection. It's invisibility. And when people become invisible to each other, everyone loses. So what's the path forward? It starts with seeing the humanity on both sides. Recognizing that men's hesitation isn't malice and women's caution isn't cruelty. It's two groups trying to navigate a landscape that changed too fast, with maps that no longer match the territory. It continues with rebuilding third spaces. Creating environments where people can interact without high stakes. Where rapport can build slowly. Where approach doesn't feel like diffusing a bomb. And it ends with clarity. With honest conversations about what we want. What we expect. What respectful pursuit looks like in a world that's still figuring out consent, context, and connection. None of this is easy. All of it requires uncomfortable honesty. But the alternative, this silence, this distance, this mutual withdrawal, it's not sustainable. We're social creatures. We need each other. And 8 brutal reasons why men won't approach isn't a celebration. It's a cry for help. From both sides. Asking the same question in different words, how do we find each other again? And maybe, just maybe, asking that question together is how we start.